Awesome. So, yesterday we spent a lot of time understanding something called conjecture and counterexample. And we kind of provided this reason that we're trying to look at situations and figure out the trick or the rule or what's happening so that way I know that this is true. If there's one domino out of place, then the argument fails, right? It breaks. So that's what we did a little bit yesterday, which was awesome. And I appreciate you guys working diligently at the boards on that. It then prepares us for today's conversation. There's a moment, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Alice in Wonderland, okay? I want to show you a really quick video clip of this show. This is the old 1951 Alice in Wonderland. I want you to pay attention to what they say, okay? So pay attention to what they say here. So in the original Lewis Carroll novel, what they had been talking about was logic in a very confused and contrary-wise manner. But I wanted to illustrate it because he mentioned something about the idea of going backwards and forwards and negating, and just all these weird little statements of taking the same phrase and playing around with it a bunch, okay? And that's kind of what we're doing today, okay? So let's start with this. Every sentence or statement or conclusion or anything that we have in geometry is either going to be true or it's going to be false. So you're welcome to start with this right here where it says the word statement. Any statement we make is either going to be true or it's going to be false. It kind of labels that as T or F, okay? And we call that the truth value, okay? Some statement, if I say all horses are turquoise, true or false? False, right? So if I had something where I said like all horses are turquoise, right? Well, then the truth value we would associate that with would be false. Okay? So that's all a truth value is. What is the statement? Is it true? Is it false? Okay? And with everything, there tends to be an opposite, right? So if we take the statement, all horses are turquoise, right? We can take that and say the exact opposite thing. We could say, well, if instead of all, I could say no horses, right, are turquoise. And I don't think I've ever heard or seen of a turquoise horse before, so I would probably say that's true. Maybe in Minecraft or something you can make a turquoise horse, but in the real world, we're probably not going to find a turquoise horse, okay? And what you notice is I took the original statement and I negated it. I said the opposite thing, and as a result, the value of the truth swapped from false to true, right? And this is called negation, okay? It means I take whatever statement I have and I say the exact opposite of that statement. As a result, the truth value associated will change. So before we kind of dig into this, what questions do you have about how we're starting our statements, the truth values, anything with negation? Okay. What then becomes our next step is how do we make our statements? What kinds of statements can we say, right? In this class, we call these statements conditional statements. Think about it. If you ever like have one of your friends or something, you're like, you can come over and hang out and play on my Xbox as long as you don't take the controller and chuck it at the TV, right? Like that's a pretty good condition to lay down, right? So if you come to my house, you don't throw the controller at the Xbox, right? You see what I'm saying? I have to say it in a very specific way. If something, then something else, okay? We call that a conditional statement. Any sentence you could ever think of can be written this way, okay? So a conditional statement, well, it's a statement that can be written in if, then form, okay? If, then, right? In terms of how you might write that, it might be something like if P, then Q, okay? If something, right? If this, well, then something else, right? If you come to my house, then you do not throw that controller at the TV. And that's read if P, then Q. Or if you want to write it even this way, P goes to Q. P implies Q. Okay? Now, P and Q have very specific names. Okay? The first is this. The hypothesis P is the phrase immediately following the word if. P is called the hypothesis, right? If I'm thinking like science, biology, something with chemistry, right? If I have a hypothesis, it's something it's an idea that I'm thinking in my head, kind of like my conjecture, right? The guess that I think is happening, right? So I'm looking at this, the hypothesis is the phrase that comes after the word if. So if I'm going to my friend's house, I'm going to my friend's house is my hypothesis, right? If that occurs, then there has to be a conclusion, right? There has to be something that says, if this happens, well, then this is the result, right? This is the verdict. We call that, well, the conclusion. The conclusion, Q, see if I can write that better. The conclusion, Q, there we go, is the phrase following the word then. Okay? P implies whatever Q is. I go to my friend's house, so I don't throw that controller, right? That's my conclusion, okay? And every sentence we could ever think of can be written this way. If I have a horse, then it is turquoise. That's false, but we could write it that way. The negation of that, right? If I don't have a horse, well, then it's not turquoise, right? And there's ways that we can start sequencing these things, right? We can negate parts. We can also kind of swap them around. And that's what Tweedledee and Tweedledum were saying, right? We can kind of take statements and mess around with them. So before we move forward, what questions do you have about if-then statements? Conclusion, hypothesis, any of these pieces? All right. So what could we do with this, right? It's one thing to just say it exists, but it's another thing to actually use it with something, right? So let's see this. The inverse, okay? Here's what you do. If I think of the word inverse, it's like I'm taking something and it's like the backwards version of that or the negation of that, right? The opposite. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to negate the hypothesis and the conclusion, okay? I'm going to take both my hypothesis and my conclusion, and I'm going to, for each of those, say the opposite of whatever that is, okay? It says something about symbolic form. We're not going to spend too much time really being hung up about that, but it looks something like this. If not P, then not Q. That little tilde, that's a Spanish character. It means not, okay? So this little squiggle right here, that just means not. So if not P, well then not Q. I'm taking each of my hypothesis and my conclusion, and I'm just swapping them. I'm negating them, okay? For example, if I don't go to my friend's house, then I am gonna throw my controller at the TV, right? I took each of the statements I originally had and just said the opposite. So what questions do you have about what an inverse is of a conditional statement? Cool. So we can take a statement and write it in if-then form, and then we could take that statement and say the exact opposite thing. We could also maybe swap the order, right? And that's what we call the converse. So that's that next one right here, the converse. It's formed by swapping the hypothesis and the conclusion. We're going to take P and Q, and we're going to swap the order, okay? And if I wanted to write it, it's something kind of like if Q, then P, right? If I don't throw the controller at the TV, then I'm going to my friend's house. Which is kind of odd to say it that way, but I could theoretically just swap the order around. They call that the converse. Not the kind of shoes, which are kind of cool, but like we're taking the order and just swapping the order, right? So what questions do you have about inverse or converse now? Now we've got one more to talk about. The contrapositive. The contrapositive is when you swap the order and negate the hypothesis and the conclusion. I'll kind of show you an example here. So you formed by swapping and negating the hypothesis and the conclusion. So I swap the order and I say the opposite of what I originally had. So this kind of looks like this. We say, if not Q, then not P, right? If I throw the controller at the TV, then I'm not going to my friend's house, right? I swapped the order, and I said the opposite. Last thing, then we'll start with example one and spend some time at the boards kind of practicing this together, okay? When it comes to the truth value, right? At the end of the day, all we're doing here is trying to rewrite sentences to see if that gives us any new information, okay? And here's what the cool thing is. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here because I want to draw something. The contrapositive and the original conditional statement, okay? The original statement and the contrapositive will always have the same truth value, okay? So I'm going to say same truth value, okay? So that's why it can then be useful to us. If we can rewrite a sentence as a contrapositive and we know that that's true, well, then the original thing I was trying to show, that's going to be true. That's why it's valuable to us. And I think you might have caught on to this, and you might be suspicious of it. The inverse and the converse will also have the same truth value. So if I wanted to show the converse of some sort of statement, right? Well, then if I can write it as its inverse and show that's true, well, then the converse has to be true as well, okay? So, what questions do you guys have about conditional statements? Okay. We're going to do example one. We're going to get you guys at the boards to see this play out a little bit. And then we're going to come back, we're going to do example two. All right, we're going to hold off on example three till Thursday, okay? So, example one, it says identify the hypothesis and the conclusion of this conditional statement. So it says if you live in Nashville, well then you live in Tennessee. So you guys tell me, what is the hypothesis here? Yeah, Joshua. Yeah, you live in Nashville, right? The hypothesis is my starting part of my sentence, right? If P is my hypothesis. So then what's my conclusion? What can I conclude about that? Yeah, you live in Tennessee. If you live in Nashville, you live in Tennessee. And now you guys tell me, would that be true? If you live in Nashville, you happen to live in Tennessee. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. Right? Unless, wait a minute, what Nashville are we talking about? Right? Do we know? It could be Nashville, Florida. Right? So specification is a good thing, right? And if we read something into it, we're going to assume probably Nashville, Tennessee. I think that's what they were going for here. But if we were being more specific, we don't exactly know that that's the Nashville they're talking about, right? So, what questions do you have about hypothesis, conclusion, anything we've been talking about here with conditional statements? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just get the group shuffled. Let me pause the recording. I'm having to record it specifically because halfway through the day, I'm not going to be here. I have a specific, there we go. Cool. So, we need to write the inverse, the converse, and the contrapositive of this statement, okay? So, the statement says this: if it is Saturday, well then there is no school. Is that true or false? True, right? If it's Saturday, there's no school, unless you go to like one of those fancy schools where it's like all the time or whatever, right? And then you're like in Hogwarts. But we're looking at this one, and we need the inverse to start with. As a reminder, we need to do what if it's asking for the inverse? What do we do? Yeah, what do we do? Right, we're flipping it, or we're negating it. Each of the hypothesis, the conclusion, we're going to say the other thing. So instead of saying it is Saturday, what are we going to say instead? It's not Saturday yet. If it is not Saturday, then what do I conclude? There's school, right? Then there is school. We just took the hypothesis and the conclusion and negated them. We said the opposite. But you guys tell me, is that true or false? Oh yeah, it's false. Why? What's the counterexample here? Sunday, right? WWE Raw. It's like we're going to put false, counterexample, Sunday. It's like what we were doing yesterday. If the conjecture has a counterexample, we know it's false. What questions do you guys have about the inverse statement? Cool. Now we need the converse. So what do I do with P and Q if I want to find that converse? I swap the order, right? I take P and Q and I swap where they are. So I'm going to say, well, if what? What can I say instead? Yeah, if there is no school, then what's my new conclusion here? Then it is Saturday. Okay? Yeah. I just take my hypothesis and my conclusion and I swap the order. So you tell me, what's the truth value here? Okay. If there's no school, then it has to be Saturday. Why?
Sunday and also like holidays.
Right, holidays too. False, you could say Sunday. You could say it's like Easter or Kwanzaa, right? Whatever sorts of holidays you could want to think of, St. Patrick's Day or Three Kings Day, and you eat like Tres Leches cake, and it's great. You could say Sunday or holiday. Good. And then the last one, the contrapositive. We need to take my hypothesis and conclusion and do what? What do I want to do?
Swap it.
Yeah, I'm going to swap the order and say the opposite, right? So I'm going to take the order, like I had with my converse, and say the opposite things. So, if what? What can I say now? If there is school, right, then what? It is not Saturday. You guys tell me, true or false? If there is school, it's not Saturday. True or false? What do we think? True, right? Wait a minute, that matches up, right? Because I said earlier, the original statement and the contrapositive have to have the same truth values. And then the inverse and the converse, those have to have the same truth values. So we're good to go, right? That's a way we can check to make sure we've done that right. So, what questions do you guys have on example number 2? Okay. We're going to hold off on example 3 until a little bit later. You're welcome to go back to the board and with that new knowledge, try this one.